Hey Group B, Denkman here. Your three vocabulary terms are going to be axis, scale, and unit. Let's start with axis. This entire picture here is a graph, and there are various things going on in this graph. A very important part of this graph is the set of axes, shown in red and blue. An axis is just a horizontal or a vertical line used on a graph to measure the exact location of any point on that graph. Every point on a graph, like this point here, has an exact measurement along the horizontal axis and an exact measurement along the vertical axis. In general, we're going to compare lots of pairs of quantities. We've already done a lot of work comparing distance and time and making stories, graphs, and tables about distance and time. So we might sometimes put time along the horizontal axis and distance along the vertical axis. However, even if we don't choose a particular story, we can name this horizontal axis the x-axis and this vertical axis the y-axis, and find the exact measurements for the position of any point using these axes. Next up comes scale. Okay, Group B, Denkman again. Your second vocabulary term is scale. So we've already talked about axes, and an axis allows us to measure the location of any point on a graph. In order to give numbers or values to the location of every point on a graph, our axis on a graph must have a scale which shows the values of every measurement that we make along each axis. We have two examples to be entered in our glossary along with scale. Here's our first one. We have a graph that is comparing time to distance. Time is being measured in seconds, distance is being measured in meters, and we have a scale here for the time axis and a scale for the distance axis. So here is our time scale, and here is our distance scale. And the box at the bottom gives more information about what these scales mean and how they work. Specifically, the horizontal scale shows that each marking represents a change of 5 seconds along the time axis. And the vertical scale shows that each marking represents a change of 10 meters along the distance axis. Next up, you will have your third and final vocabulary term, unit, or unit of measure. Alright, Group B, your third vocabulary term, unit, or unit of measure. Units are standard amounts that we use to measure things. For instance, if we want to measure a distance, that's how far it is from one point to another point, we might measure it in inches, or if it's a bit of a larger distance, we might measure it in feet, and if it's much larger, we might measure it in miles, and if we lived in a place where we use a much more rational set of distance units, we might measure it in millimeters, okay? And if you look down here, you'll have a chance to list some units that you're familiar with. Take one you're very familiar with, 1 foot. I myself measure just short of 6 feet tall. 1 foot is a standard amount. And so feet are a unit we use to measure distance because everybody can agree about exactly how long 1 foot is. If I just said I'm 3 tall, it wouldn't be really clear. If I was 3 inches tall, 3 feet tall, 3 miles tall, or if I said I'm 1 arm length tall or 10 arm lengths tall, because people have different arm lengths, those units would not be very standard. So they wouldn't be equal in different contexts. So units are standard amounts used to measure things. Please take a moment to write down examples of time, distance, and weight units with which you are familiar. For instance, time might be measured in seconds or years. Distance might be measured in feet or kilometers, and weight might be measured in ounces, grams, pounds, tons, etc.